Hey everybody, welcome back. So in this presentation we're going to talk about consumer surplus. So that's the surplus of all the consumers in a market. Up until now we've been talking about individual demand curves. The process to go from an individual demand curve to a market demand curve is very simple. For each price you just add up how much each person in the market demands, and that's the quantity for the market demand. There's a pretty good example on page 166 of the textbook if you want to check that out. But so in this presentation, we're going to be looking at market demand curves. So this is not just a single individual, this is the whole market. Okay, so what we're going to be looking at in this presentation is a measure of how well off consumers are. And so this concept in economics is called consumer surplus. So if you think about a market demand curve, what it's showing is that over here, there are some people in the market that are willing to pay almost $10 for tickets. So I think this demand curve is movie tickets, yeah. So you can think about a market demand curve as showing how much people value or would be willing to pay for the good that they're looking for. So there are people up here who are willing to pay almost $10, $9 for a movie ticket. Here are some people up in here, they're willing to pay $8. The market price for movie tickets in this example is only $4. So the difference in between what people are willing to pay versus what they actually have to pay, that's called consumer surplus. So you can always find the surplus that consumers get by subtracting what they would have paid, the price that's actually on their demand curve, so like right here, minus what they actually had to pay. Everything in between is a surplus that they captured because they were willing to pay $9, but they only had to pay $4, so they captured a surplus of $5. And each person along this demand curve, no matter where they are, they captured that surplus. So all the people who actually bought tickets, they captured surplus, all of them. All the way up until the last person who bought a ticket, they valued the ticket. To them, it was actually worth $4, and they purchased it for $4, and that's it. People after here, so like this person here, they only valued the ticket at about $3, so they didn't buy it because the market price is $4. So the aggregate amount, or the total amount of consumer surplus that all the consumers in the market captured is just the area of this triangle right here. Excuse me. So to find the consumer surplus, you just calculate the area of this triangle. That formula is right here. So the total consumer surplus in this example was $24. It was valued at $24. Yeah, so that's how you find consumer surplus. It's always the area under the demand curve but above the price. So consumer surplus. Okay, so it's kind of cool to be able to tell how much surplus consumers capture, but most of the time when we are using consumer surplus, we're going to be looking to see how did consumer surplus change after something in the market changed. So here's an example where the price started at $4, so the price was originally $4. So consumer surplus was $24, just like we just calculated. But then the price goes up to $8.50. So now, under the new price, consumer surplus is only this little triangle. So we might want to ask ourselves, well, how much did consumer surplus change when the price went up? So you should intuitively know that consumer surplus will get smaller because higher prices are bad for consumers. But if we want to find the actual amount of change in consumer surplus, it's going to be the big green triangle that we started off as with consumer surplus minus the consumer surplus at the end was just this small maroon triangle. And when you do that, the shape you get is this trapezoid. So right in here. So the change in consumer surplus is the area of that trapezoid. If you actually do the math, so you can do this any way you want. You can calculate the area of the big green triangle first, which we already did. It was $24 in the first slide, and then you can calculate the area of the small triangle, which we did here. It's $1.50. So you ended up with $1.50. You started with $24 surplus. So the change in your surplus is negative $22.5. If you actually did the geometry formula and calculated the area of this trapezoid for the change in surplus, you would also get that the area of that trapezoid is 2250. So that's how you calculate change in surplus. Okay, so one thing we might be interested in is how does elasticity affect how much your surplus might change. So here we're looking at two individuals. They both start at point A. So the price is originally $24. And they are both consuming the same quantity. It looks like maybe 6 units or something like that. So let's compute the change in surplus for both of them. So for the blue consumer, their change in surplus is going to be, their original surplus was everything below the blue demand curve, but above the price. So this triangle was consumer surplus 1. And then consumer 2, who had the red demand curve, their consumer surplus was originally this red triangle. So then when the price drops, now consumer 2 is going to have this entire triangle. Or sorry, consumer 1 will have that entire triangle, and the red consumer will have this triangle as their surplus. Okay, so if we want to find the change in surplus, we can, I'm going to erase some stuff to make the change in surplus clearer. Whoop, that's not the eraser. Okay, so for the blue consumer, consumer 1, the change in surplus is going to be this trapezoid right here. So, this trapezoid. We're going to say that initially they were consuming 6 units, and let's say this is 13 units. Okay, so the consumer surplus increased because the price went down, so that makes the consumer better off. We need to find the area of this trapezoid. It says in the problem the price dropped to 10 units. So this length is 14. This height was 6. This base was 13. So using the formula for the area of a trapezoid, you get 6 plus 13 over 2 times 14. So this is going to be negative $133. Oh, sorry, positive because the price went down. So the change in consumer surplus for the blue consumer is plus $133. Okay, so the change in surplus for the red consumer, so they end up going up to consume 20 units when the price drops. is this whole trapezoid. Okay, so everything is the same except for the bottom base for the second consumer. So 6 plus 20 over 2 times 14. So their surplus goes up by $182. And so this is pretty indicative of how elasticity affects change in surplus. Because elasticity is a measure of adaptability, the more elastic demand is, the better, the more surplus you're going to be able to capture if a price goes down, and the more insulated against harm you're going to be if the price goes up. So for a consumer, elasticity is good. It makes you better off whether the price goes up or down. If it goes down, so this an example of a good that might for where demand might be elastic is something where there are a lot of substitutes for it. So maybe the good we're looking at is Gatorade. So the price of Gatorade drops. There are a lot of people who are going to substitute away from Powerade and start buying Gatorade. So people are able to take advantage of the price drop. And, vice versa. If we were looking at Gatorade and the price went up, because there are good substitutes that are available, you can easily substitute away and not have to bear a very big penalty for a price increase for Gatorade. So generally, the more elastic demand is, the better off consumers are going to be no matter what happens, whether price goes up or down. So because elasticity is a measure of adaptability, that's usually good for consumers. Okay, so this graph just shows the change in consumption after a decrease in income. So this is not a price change, it's an income change. So consumer surplus will change here. If your income went down, you might imagine that your change in consumer surplus should be negative. So this was your original surplus. It's below the demand but above the price. So this green triangle. And this was 9 by... This is 17, this is 8, so this is also 9. So original consumer surplus is 81 halves, 9 times 9 over 2. The new consumer surplus is just the small triangle because your income went down. Looks like this is 4, this is 12 minus 8, so this is only 4. So 16 halves. Change in consumer surplus is new surplus minus old. So you lost 65 halves in surplus. Graphically, the lost surplus is this zone in here. So it's still a trapezoid, it's just turned differently. Wow, this 15 minutes just flew by. Time flies when you're shading in trapezoids. All right, so there's an explanation of this in the textbook on this page, and I will talk to y'all soon. Thanks for listening. Bye.